Weird. Huh. Hello, everybody. It's time for Microbrew, Milwaukee Brewers chatter from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It's a somber occasion, but here we are a few days after the end of the 2024 Brewers season at the hands of the New York Mets. Talking about it, Mets have already played two more games in the NLDS, 1-1 with Philadelphia. A couple thrillers. So good for them. They're very blessed, etc., etc. The Brewers, of course, their season is over. We're here to discuss it in a little more depth.
The Brewers are not blessed.
They are
Sorry,
not blessed.
I think that's the first time I've ever cut you off before you introduced me. But it had to be.
Well,
it was important.
What is the opposite of blessed? Cursed.
Cursed,
maybe. Yeah.
Cooked. Fried.
Cooked is good. Washed. Although they haven't even gotten to washed yet. He's Curt Hogg, by the way, Brewers reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Did I say who I am? I'm JR Radcliffe. You know who we are. You've been listening to us. If you're here, you've been suffering through it with us. That's where you know us already. And Curt, we got to look back. You've had a couple days. You've been able to digest, as they say. What are you thinking, Curt? Where are you right now? Tell me where your head is at 3 days after this ended.
I was able to digest a wonderful brisket that I cooked yesterday. That was on my list. Top thing on the end of season list is smoke a brisket. Except I don't have a smoker. I just have like a regular propane gas grill, so it makes it a little more challenging. But came out great, baby. Came out great. Come on over, JR.
I assume you have leftovers, right?
Oh yeah, it wasn't a huge brisket. It was still like 4 or 5 pounds. So
yeah, I'm in.
Plenty.
I'm in. I'll be there tomorrow. Let's do Monday
right.
night dinner. It sounds great. Lydia
All
has
right.
soccer. I'll just swing by after I drop her off.
Good. Well, we have nothing else going on, so
we don't. The season's over. It's off season, baby.
I was able to digest my brisket, but let me tell you, I still haven't digested that the way that ended.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't have any more. I don't have words. This is the podcast where I'm supposed to have words, but you know what? I still don't. Holy smokes! We'll get into it as this goes on for sure. But I don't know if I've ever experienced whiplash from a singular sporting event in the way that I experienced whiplash from that sporting event. Maybe if I was like a Seattle Seahawks fan when they passed it on the goal line in the Super Bowl, fairly similar. But the thing is, the Seahawks didn't have the lead. They still could have been stopped short. Just a remarkable and unspeakable turn of events for the local 9. We'll break it all down here, but yeah, we're 3-4 days post-mortem, and it still hasn't sunk. And usually you're kind of able to turn the page at a certain point and like rationalize what happened. I'm still not there in the context of all that has happened to this franchise in the last 6-7 years. Just brutal and really difficult to make sense of too.
I'll tell you when I've had that whiplash before. It was in 2019 when I was in Washington, D.C. covering the wild card game. And I got to say, that one was even faster because if you remember, everyone remembers the ball going under Trent Grisham's glove. What they don't remember probably, or maybe they do, is that Juan Soto was thrown out on that play. He was caught in a rundown. So the 3 runs scored, and Juan Soto, I don't know what he was doing. He's probably just celebrating a little too much. He gets thrown out. The inning ends on that play. That is the last batter of the inning. So then the Brewers immediately transition into the top of the 9th. Washington's going crazy, and 3 outs come very quickly. And that's it. Like it was jaw-dropping. This actually wasn't even quite that, because you still had the rest of that Mets inning after Pete Alonso's home run. They score another run. Then the Brewers get a leadoff man on. Like
leadoff hit.
A little bit of run. Yeah, by Sal Frelick. You figure if Bryce Terang can just sort of not hit into a double play, which is unlike him, like you have to hit the ball kind of right at a guy, which he did, of course,
and hard
inning-ending double play. But then Jackson Chourio gets one last chance. I mean, it feels like even then you're like, they still have something here. But obviously about as dispiriting as it gets. And, I asked Todd this, and I have a feeling you might have a different answer. I'm not sure. What is the glue that holds all of these postseason misfortunes together? Because if you look at this game 3, I really think as time goes on, game 1 will be seen as the disaster class here, because that is a game that they absolutely blew. It was how they
Right.
played that cost them
Cover
that game.
first base.
Right, exactly. Game 3, and you could certainly argue they would lose game 1 anyway, because all those hitters that hit have to hit, like you could argue that. But game 3, yes, they had it in their hands. They were 2 outs away, but you had your best player. The plan worked to a T. Jake Bauers, the pinch hitter for Rhys Hoskins, of course, he homers. So you get a homer from an unlikely source, very unlikely, Sal Frelick. We're going to talk about that in a second. But you got it to Devin Williams. Everything, even Freddie Peralta, like unconventional, you got to the place you wanted to get, and it still didn't work. So even though it was a huge gut punch, I mean, the Mets just won it. Like, they just took it from them. Is there a connective glue between what we saw in 2019 and I guess 2020, if we want to talk about 2020, 2021, 2023, these heartbreaks in the first round, different players, different manager, different
Yeah.
general manager? Like, what is it?
This
What connects them?
and I'll speak to the fan side of things here coming up. But this, as a reporter, is what's so challenging about making sense of this run by the Brewers. I mean, just a series of cataclysmic events from this franchise, with playoff games and playoff series on the lines. Game 2 against the Mets is the exception there, which is, I'll get to that with the fans part later. But it's really difficult to tie this together with a common thread, other than the literal threads that they're wearing that say Brewers on the front and are gold and blue. It's
Even
separate
those
players.
have changed, Curt. Even those are different from what they were in 2019 and
It's different
what?
players. They had a new manager this year. Like, as we talked about, this team, if there was gonna be a run, it was just gonna be the vibes run. This was the vibes team. Um, just a plucky underdog, like, totally different style and different, feel around this team than in years past. And you know what? New players come in, and guess what? It's the same dang thing. Like, Yoel Payam's not covering first base is tied together with Juan Soto's single and Ryan Zimmerman's bloop single, and those things are 5 years apart and have nothing else connected except for the fact that it feels like it's just a cruel fate that the baseball world and the baseball gods have sent to Milwaukee and sent to the stadium and sent to the city, because that game 3 was where it was supposed to start turning. It was
It
where it
felt
was
like it
supposed to.
had.
I mean, for how many years, how many playoff runs have Brewers fans cried for? Well, can just like someone random step up? Someone just like, give us that moment. And you got the moment in game 2, but that didn't assure you a series win, which is really what matters here, is winning a series. I think that changes the whole dynamic of the field around it. Like, game 2 is still great and takes a little of the sting away from, not the sting away, but a little of like it's maybe less of a failure in this series now, because you did have that comeback, but it doesn't take the sting away. But game 3 was supposed to be the moment that propelled this team on, at least to the next series, maybe further.
Mhm.
Jake Bauers, pinch hit. Tobias Myers, 5 shutout. Sal Frelick. JR, the stadium was shaking. I don't know if you've ever been in a stadium as loud as that one was, but I haven't.
I maybe in 2008, maybe, and I'm not sure of that. That's clouded with memory, but
Yeah.
that was the most alive crowd I can remember. And what's better for vibes than a crowd that is as into it as any crowd you've ever seen? You have the back-to-back home runs. I mean, what the Mets are doing right now, I think, is being attributed to just like playing meaningful baseball down the stretch and that doubleheader before, but this would have been that for the Brewers. They would have gone down 1-0, been the first team in this modern format to come back from that. And I mean, I absolutely think they would have done what New York did on day 1 against Philly, like hang on for dear life against Zach Wheeler and then win in the end. Like that. It really felt like, as I was sitting there in the 8th, maybe after the home runs, it's like, we talk so much about vibes, but this really feels like the start of something. This really
Mhm.
feels like something
Yeah.
turned in their
It turned.
favor.
Yeah. And that's what's so cruel, I think, for the fans, the listeners of the
Yeah.
pod, the faithful sickos that tune into this every Monday morning or Thursday morning when we do a surprise uh, emergency pod after Garrett Mitchell hits a big homer, is like, It was let's peel back the curtain a little bit. Thursday night was really difficult in a lot of different ways, like, from our standpoint. Trying to make sense of, like, the whiplash of that loss was one thing. The emotions of the clubhouse, you saw Christian Yelich's interview with Bob Uecker, like, so that's on another
Yeah.
like, a humanity level right there of, like, just seeing a bunch of grown men cry, and talk to them, in the state that they're in. And then there's also this feeling of, like, we as reporters, our jobs is to be objective. It's not, we don't root for the teams we cover, but we cover the teams for the fans. It's like that's why we have jobs, is because people care a lot about this team and other teams too, but specifically this one. Like, the people in Milwaukee
Mhm.
really, really, really want a winner from this team. And so you could just feel the despair, like, just the crushing nature of that ninth inning, what that did to fans in this instance. That was different than the Freddie Freeman homer. That was different than Corbin Burns collapsing the second time through the order last year. Well, it was maybe a little, I think, maybe a little different than the Soto play. Maybe like this does feel like it was a little more crushing. I don't know if you would agree, but
I do, because they were not supposed they were the lesser team in 2019.
right.
Washington had a
And there
much better record than Milwaukee.
and it wasn't at home, and there was not that ultimate high of the
Mhm.
Sal Frelick homer. I mean, the Bowers homer was great too, but the Sal Frelick homer was really where, like, the roof was blown off the place. Sorry, Mark, you're gonna have to pay for another one. And also in
Oh.
2019, there was not the history of playoff. I don't want to call it chokes, but playoff disappointments.
No, they had just come off of an amazing year. 2018
Yeah,
was objectively a success. So, like, 2019 was icing on the cake, right? They went
yeah.
backwards a little bit. So,
It's still, it probably was like it burned a lot. Probably people probably woke up the
yeah.
next day feeling like they did on Friday after Game 3. But just like trying to understand that emotion and convey that in writing, it like an extreme challenge. I hope we did a good job with it. Um, but I was talking to Todd about this too. Like, we were on the phone the next day, like, man, I have not felt like that, like, even last year's playoff exit, driving home felt nothing like that drive home on Thursday. It was like an odd melancholy, like shock, and sort of like like an empathetic feeling for how
Right.
sad a lot of people that we know and these listeners are. Like, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but man, just just brutal.
Yeah. I mean, it should be pointed out, this is not unique to Milwaukee. Minnesota lost 18 consecutive playoff games. Minnesota, a market obviously very similar to Milwaukee, has had their struggles as well. Teams like Seattle, even San Diego, they've never won a World
Sure,
Series.
sure.
They've been, San Diego's been there. There are other franchises that have suffered. Um, but as this compiles, it's easy to see why it starts to feel unique. 2-11 in your last 13 playoff games, like, what's that about? And I think, going back to Devin Williams, like, their all-star superstar closer, Josh Hader in 2019 and 2021, and Devin
Yeah.
Williams in 2024. I mean, the whole point is to get the
And
game in their hands,
it
and
went
they're the ones who end up with
perfectly,
the
JR.
losses that get you eliminated. Yeah, it went
Ou
perfectly. You're
out
right.
outside of a couple more hits with runners in scoring position, I mean, the Mets are playing baseball too, like, they could make pitches too. It went perfectly.
And it wasn't
Nick Mears? Excuse
stud.
me? Like, Freddie Peralta came out of, I love the Cespedes barbecue tweet in the 8th inning that Pat Murphy was going full college coach regional. "Oh, you pitched
Yeah.
2 days ago? Get out there for the 8th." It
Yeah, and I mean,
it
Devin's
the
pitch to Pete
script
Alonso is a really good pitch. He just hit it.
mm,
Well,
hung it a
okay, it
little.
wasn't the best. It wasn't the best airbender we've ever seen, but it's off the
No.
plate. It's low.
In so much that it was a Devin Williams airbender. I mean, we could get into the tipping pitches thing, but I don't really think that's
Sure.
gonna assuage
No.
anyone's pains or really do anything for us right now, so
I also
maybe he
I
was.
don't buy it. I don't buy it, Kurt. It's so
You don't?
subtle. I don't know. I don't buy it. I mean, I feel
See,
like every time
I
somebody gets lit up, it's, "Oh, they're tipping pitches. Here's how,"
I
I don't
agree
think
with
so.
you, but, like, baseball players notice these things. I
I'm
don't
sure
know
they
this them
do. They're
live.
studying film.
And so the subtlety of it, I'm watching it, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, you could that was you could argue he was tipping pitches for sure, but, like, what do they see it?" But, yeah, I think they
Even
do
John
see it a
Boy
lot of
said,
the time.
maybe. I guess my thought is, why didn't anybody hit him sooner? Why did it come down to this? Is this the
Yeah,
first time they were like, oh, he's tipping here in game 3 of the wild card series? We couldn't hit him last night when he clawed through us in 10 pitches. But tonight we got, and I mean, it's good
yeah,
hitters. It's
then
Francisco Lindor. It's Pete Alonso. I get it.
the Nimmo at bat stood out to me, because he got him to chase and swing through those 2 changeups at the bottom of the zone, underneath the
Yeah.
zone, and then he goes back to it, which is understandable in that spot, but he just totally missed his spot, left it
Yes.
up, so and Brandon Nimmo's a good hitter, so that's where it really felt like that inning changed for me, um, and then once you got behind 3-1 on Pete Alonso, it was like, I
Yeah.
don't see a way out of this. Maybe if you throw a good 1-1 pitch to him and he rolls over it, that was the way out,
Double play.
but boy, getting behind 3-1 to Alonso was he probably need to throw him a fastball there.
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely worried about it. I didn't think, oh, he's just gonna, you know, grate through these 3 very good hitters. I figured it would be a challenge. I did think when he got the strikeout for the first out, I did think that it was
And
probably
then
it
got
was
ahead
over.
0-2 on Nimmo. Got ahead 0-2 on Nimmo. It was like,
Yep.
"Oh, this is
And they were
this is
good
what Devin
pitches.
Williams does." Yeah. They can't hit his changeup. No. They're
Right.
not yeah. Which again,
I mean,
only adds to the magnitude of that swing from Alonso.
yeah, this stuff doesn't happen in the playoffs. Like, it was historic what he did. And
Yeah.
and he opposite field, it barely got out. I mean, I just think it was a good hitter hitting a decent pitch, and that's all there is to it. Like, he's a power hitter. They had not hit a single home run in this series. That was their only home run the entire series. And so, honestly, they're kind of due. You got to expect the Mets are a good team. You got to expect they're going to hit one. It just obviously came at the worst time conceivable against a guy that you thought was going to be the best of your pitchers on that day and any given day because of how dominant he has been. Curt, let me tell you why I was pretty forlorn afterwards. It's extremely selfish. It's selfish. I'm not gonna lie. Well, first of all, I'm kidding about this, but like it was really tough being in that clubhouse because I said this on the last podcast. I've said this elsewhere, but I don't think people understand how sudden that comes for them too. Like they pick up their stuff, they leave the locker room, they leave the clubhouse, they're going home to wherever they live. They're not gonna see these guys again. There's no, oh, we'll come back for breakfast tomorrow morning, or we'll get together again on Monday for like the postseason awards banquet. Like that stuff doesn't happen. At least in 2019, they had a flight home to sort of come to terms with it. This is okay, go back to the locker
Pack
room,
your
get your
stuff up.
things and bye. I mean, you're not going to have the same teammates again. Like most of these guys will be back, of course, but it's pretty sudden, stark, like farewell tour very quickly. But something was taken from me, Curt. Something was taken from me too. I
Remember
want to
what they
play you
took
some
from you.
audio. Remember what they took from me? September 24th, I believe, is the date of this podcast. I want to play just a little bit of audio. It's a little over a minute, maybe almost two. Here's what I had to say. Here's what I had to say. Curt, I can't believe
They
I,
took that from you.
would they build me a statue if that had stood, if the 2-0 score
They
had
would
stood?
have built Sal Frelick a statue, and
Do I get to
in doing so, you would have also been, by
Here's what
association,
I
commemorated forever.
Yeah. Here's what I will settle
We
for. A
could have built you a
statue
statue.
I will settle for a statue of Sal and then my words, all 1 minute and 45 seconds of that,
Oh, yeah.
inscribed
It's like
like
yeah, yeah,
like the Gettysburg Address.
it's like the Kirk Gibson homer, you associate some moments with calls, and instead of the broadcast call, it would be a microbrew
The
call.
the words JR said on some podcast. That's it. Including the part where I say, "Oh, he's only got 30 RBIs. What's wrong with this guy?" Including all of it. Oh man, Curt. That was you know,
You
I've
grabbed
thrown a
me. You grabbed my
I
arm.
grabbed your arm. I grabbed your arm when that ball because of course,
I
like that's a no doubter. It was gone
Yeah,
immediately.
off with the trajectory to it was like, "Oh, that's majestic."
Yeah.
Sal
I grabbed your
Sal
arm.
Yeah. Oh, it was like it kinda turned into like a college bench, like basketball bench, like, "Hold me back,"
Mhm.
moment that was Yeah,
I
that was we've talked about the high moments of seasons.
that was it. That was it.
2018 was Jesus Aguilar walking off the field in game 2, taking the ovation from
Yeah.
Wade Miley. That was it.
Never had one of those in 2020, interestingly enough. I
No, there was
I
just no good moments.
when I cover a game, I feel like I compartmentalize really well. I don't even experience the game like I do elsewhere. But I broke character pretty hard in that moment. I was pretty fired up. I was pretty excited. I was kind of running around the press box a little bit, being a little stupid. Not stupid. It was fine. It was just I don't think I'm pretty sure I was beaming ear to ear throughout most of that. But anyway, that's just a footnote now. I am just
It
lost to history, Curt.
and that's exactly why this was so bad. Sal Frelick, like, let us say it so we can try to continue to wrap our minds around that which cannot be wrapped around. It's like the Holy Trinity. You ain't wrapping your mind around it, so don't try. Sal Frelick hit a home run on the first pitch after Jake Bauers hit a go-ahead home run in a winner-take-all playoff game in the 7th inning. Sal Frelick has the lowest average exit velocity of any regular major league batter this year. That's like 250 batters.
Sal Frelick had not homered since May 15th.
May 5th, Jake Bauers batted 199, but not to take, we're taking away from Sal Frelick here. Sorry, this is about Sal
I mean,
Frelick.
it's still fair. It's the unlikeliest back-to-back home runs, I'm going to say
You
it, in
could
Brewers history.
you could watch entire 100%. You could watch entire batting practice rounds of Sal Frelick and not see him put one in the seats. And then you're
Every
like,
time he
where's
came up, every time he came to the plate, I was like, does it count if it's a sharp single up the middle? Does it count if he hits it to where the outfielder is standing right now? Mind you, they play very shallow for Sal Frelick. Does that count? Can I count it? That's what I was saying throughout the first the 2.5 games. I wanted that really
and then
bad.
he
I believed it,
and then he
Curt. I
bopped one.
believed it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
the place was literally shaking. As an aside, are we having Sal Frelick discourse now? Because we're going to spend the maybe we'll save this for deeper in the off season.
no,
There will be Sal Frelick thoughts. Like this guy, when he starts swinging the bat harder, it's not a power hitter, but he's a better hitter when he does that. And there's a little bit of power in there. Not necessarily homers all the time, but there's a little power in there. And we saw it down the stretch a little bit.
he put the ball in the air a lot. He was hitting a lot of line drives toward the end of the season. He was kind of locked in. Here's how I want to talk about him because it plays into a larger question I have. One of the things I think that if you wanted to come up going back to that question of like connective tissue between the struggles that the Brewers have had, one of the things is they don't produce bats out of this organization. That is a long-standing problem. It won't get solved in 1 year. Maybe with the 2023 draft class, it actually will, although that's mostly pitchers. But still, that leaves them short of capital to trade. It leaves them short of like bona fide hitters that they didn't have to go get. And with a team that doesn't want to spend, we don't need to argue whether or not they should or can or what the market means or whatever. Like they don't spend. They have to use what little money they do spend on guys to supplement their offense because they don't produce offensive players. There's Ryan Braun, Jonathan Lucroy, and then you got to start talking about like Lorenzo Cain, who obviously spent the bulk of his career not here.
Doesn't count.
Matt Laporta, who was traded for a really good player, I guess. I mean, he was developed, he was good, became something for the Brewers. I don't know.
Orlando
This
Arcia,
year, Orlando Arcia, Alcides Escobar, like a lot of
Keston.
glove. There's some glove in there. Oh, our Prince. Here's what I want to say though. By the end of the year, we almost got to a point where I feel like you could argue this is a little bit of a breakthrough year. Obviously, there's Jackson Chourio. We tend to not count him when we talk about the development of the organization because he was such a once in a lifetime shooting star. Like he didn't even spend much time in the organization, but he's here. Sal Frelick had a strong finish and produced in the postseason a really big moment, and he's a really great defensive player. He's doing all of this with like a busted hip too, which is amazing. Bryce Terang, I don't know how to assess his season other than what it is. Great defensively, not good offensively, but for a while it was good offensively, and he obviously had a very good series as well. And Garrett Mitchell, who when he was healthy, I think just straight up had a pretty good year, is a very good defensive player, has some things to work on. Also produced a major moment in the postseason. 4 offensive players from your organization. So I feel like it's way too strong to say this was a breakthrough season. I feel like they're still very, very lacking in this department. And I don't think there are a ton of obvious guys who are about to hit the surface that will change course for the Milwaukee Brewers. But this was a pretty big success, I think, for their farm system to have this series at the very least. I don't know. How do you? I'm rambling a little. How do you feel about all this?
Yeah, it's interesting because like Orlando Arcia was probably the best player that they developed between starting in, I don't know, 2013 through Jackson Church, Tyrone Taylor, maybe in that category too.
Ugh,
But
yeah,
Orlando
don't even
Arcia did. The funny thing about that is Arcia did have the playoff moments. So you can't really say like the playoff lack of success is due to, well, I guess the guys they have
No,
being
you're
bad, but
right.
they probably could have used some more guys over the course of these years, no doubt. Like no denying that it has not been great. But yeah, no, the corner has been turned with these guys. Sure, like Churio is great because he's Jackson Churio, not necessarily like a ton of what the Brewers did or didn't do. But you have to give them credit though for the investment that they've made in that side of that side of player development, the international scouting and et cetera. Like this was their first real breakthrough in that area, and now they've carried that forward. So that's a positive sign for the organization, no doubt. Like they seem to be doing really good things down there. They have other teams asking them, "How do you do it?" And I doubt they give them a good answer. But yeah, this year probably, if you look at it, was a positive breakthrough on the hitting development side. That said, like I don't know what Bryce Terang's ceiling really is.
Mm.
90, 95 ceiling 95 WRC plus. Maybe he could be league average. But again, that's still a really, really good player. Um, we're going to need to see a lot more out of Joy Ortiz. I mean, he'll give you great value at shortstop. Like he's going to be an incredible defensive shortstop. So that helps soften some of the blow if you don't hit. But gonna need to see more from him. Yeah, Garrett Mitchell's kind of the interesting one there because there's a lot of reasons to and a lot of different like ways to look at him and come out kind of unimpressed. The strikeout rate,
Mhm.
like if you just like if you look at the analytics and the numbers, probably not the best player, not the sexiest player. You look at the scouting, not the sexiest player, but he just produces, man. He crushes he can't hit fastballs in a certain spot, but he crushes a lot of other pitches, and he's got this upside and, um, yeah, uh, good player, if he can stay healthy, that is, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kinda where the
Well, I think
Brewers are
it
at, like,
did.
that was the biggest question coming into this year about the Brewers probably is, like, if they take a step forward in this area, it's a positive year.
Well, I think it does answer it. The question is answered as the Brewers aren't good at that, and it's killing them. Like they just never seem to have a complete team, right? One year they've got the great pitching, like in 2021, and no offense. Offense just completely lets them down. One year, 2018, they have a really good offense. They got an MVP player in the middle of their lineup, and maybe they will again when Jackson Churio is, well, next year for all that, for that matter. But they didn't really have any pitching. They had to kind of piece it together. They had to do openers and bait and switches and one innings from Gio Gonzalez. Like they had to patch it together. This year I would argue there were a lot of things that their starters and their offense wasn't great. Their defense was, but I yeah, like I don't think those four guys, I mean Churio we'd have to set aside. I don't think those other three guys are going to be special offensive players. I think they're going to be great role players. They'll fit in, they'll be good. But they got to start producing dudes. And I don't mean Churio dudes. That's another level. Congratulations. That's one of the things, very few teams are going to
But
have
they
that kind
yeah,
of
but
player.
they do have that now, like, they do have a guy you can look at and say, "Yeah, he could be a 5-win player next year." That's a pretty
Yeah,
big deal. That's a pretty
sure it
big
is.
deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Um and maybe that is the difference, but like they haven't been able to do that, and I feel like there are tendrils of that. The money that they've had to
Sure.
spend elsewhere. They've had to go get Reese Hoskins on a 2-year deal, and granted, we love that signing. I still think in the moment it made perfect sense, but that's holding them back a little bit. They do not have a
Yeah.
third baseman next year.
No,
Those
their
types of things.
position their their I don't wanna call it inability, but the weaknesses in the hitting position player development side have left them to scour for position players in various areas,
Bargains.
and it not only just bargains, but like Reese Hoskins, Jackie Brad, like it just hasn't worked out for the most part. Um, and that kind of
Andrew
leaves
McCutcheon.
you Andrew McCut. It just it leaves you in a spot where the offense was good this year, but it does put you in a tougher position. I don't know where this is coming from. This is sort of just a sense. I do feel like there's a trade coming. This like some sort of notable, significant acquisition on the offense coming this offseason.
You think?
And
I mean,
I have no reason. I don't have any. This is just
how
sort
it
of just
feels.
taking a guess and how it feels going into this offseason. But that is what I think of. I haven't looked at their payroll yet for the exact number to going to
Yeah.
next year. Willie Adamas will be coming off the books. They won't tender a lot of free agents, but there should be money in there to spend. The difficulty, as we've seen, and I don't think like this is talked about enough in the baseball circles, is like spending correctly, spending wisely. And again, like that's difficult to differentiate, right? Because Reese Hoskins was, I would argue, wise spending. It was a spot that you absolutely needed a guy who's performed at a very high level on offense throughout his career, and it just didn't work out. So um, we'll
Well, and at
see.
the
I
beginning of
don't
the
know. I
season,
think something's coming.
when at the beginning of the season we said worst case scenario, he's terrible, and he comes back for the second year. Not great, but there is a chance he is better 1 year fully removed from that
Healthy,
ACL
yeah,
surgery.
sure,
So there's a chance it works out, and he still had
sure.
26 homers, which
He
isn't good enough
he
coupled with everything
he is
else, but
like he is like 18 months removed from the surgery by now, but
I know,
a
I
full
know.
off season after being a year plus removed. I get it. And look, you can
Yes,
do a
I
lot worse than Reese Hoskins at first base. We expected him to do something in the playoffs, and boy, oh boy, could we not have been any more wrong about that. I think maybe it was sort of like a it was sort of like a well, they're in first place. This is fine. It could be worse. Like this guy hits in the playoffs. No, that's not how it ended up. He was quite bad and looked really slow this year. But we said the same things about Jesse Winker and oh, Jesse Winker. Whoops.
Yes. Rhys Hoskins 0 for 9 in the series. The best thing he did was get hit by a pitch with the bases loaded that drove in a run. His lineup spot was also where Jake Bauers, of course, hit that home run in game 3. Jesse Winker, maybe the template. Like sometimes these guys just get better the next year, even as they get a year older. I mean, I don't. If Rhys Hoskins does what Jesse Winker did this year, I think you'll be okay with it. But it's, that's still not like what you're paying for exactly. Because Jesse Winker was a pretty good bargain on top of everything that he did for the Nationals and then the Mets this season. Let's talk about Winker just a little bit. What in the world? Like that guy. Now I don't want to be too harsh to him because people were booing him viciously in this series. They booed him last year when he was on the Brewers. I think we all understand what happened. He wasn't healthy, and I don't know why he couldn't just say in the postseason, "I'm not healthy. You don't want me on this roster." I don't know if it's in any player's nature to do that. So, like, I don't know what he could have done that really quite merited that reaction. But also, man, he
He,
seems to really have it out for the Brewers.
yeah, I mean that. I think when Frankie Montas hit him in the backside in the final week of the weekend of the regular season, I think that really burned him. I think
What was
that
that
really
for? I still don't know. Was there some
well.
jawing earlier in the
Well,
year?
Wink, yeah, with the Nationals, Winker had hit a double or a homer or something, maybe in the same game, and there was some jawing from him, and that's not a surprise. Like kind of if you read between Willie Adamas's or no Christian Yelich actually his Christian Yelich's comments on the broadcast during Game 1, it was like the players. I'll let you guys figure that out. Like Jesse Winker can run a little bit hot. He did a pretty good job in his time in Milwaukee of like working hard to be a good teammate and not be kind of like a jackwagon, for lack of a better term. You could see he made a really, really conscious effort early in his time with Milwaukee, and like for the most part, a lot of players didn't mind him. They, there's some endearing parts of that as a teammate, the Wink Show, as they call it. But he can run a little hot, and maybe a little more than a little hot. And yeah, I would hold it against me if I was booed in the playoffs and then booed in July and then booed in playoff or booed in the playoffs the next year in pre games and when I came out to bat. I would run a little hot too. I can get it. The thing with Adames was weird. It was like that was I did not understand what he was going for. That what Winker was going for there. He was kind of just barking to bark. But then again, sometimes that's what happens when you feel slighted and probably have been slighted, and then come through and absolutely slam it to your former team.
Yeah, I think Winker was just talking to the nearest person in a Brewers uniform, honestly. I really don't think that I can't imagine it was anything personal. What do I know? I'll be honest, I'm not giving him a whole lot of thought the rest of the way here.
Well, it was
Uh,
personal, and maybe not towards Adamas, but to the Brewers.
yeah, for sure. Um, it was personal for Jesse Winker. Like, I'm sure he was like, "You guys all hated me. I was just hurt, and now I'm back, and I'm going on, and you're not." So, going back to this trade you just
I would say
mentioned, this trade
that's
that
enough Jesse Winker time. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm done with him. Great hair, congratulations, but you're not gonna be the reason the Mets go on. I am interested in that only because I wanna know what the Brewers have to give at this point. Now, they do have a farm system that I mean, I know we're fond of the farm system. It's not a top 10 farm system anymore. It's not, depending on who you ask. And so there might be some guys they're so loath to trade from that. Devin Williams is certainly a name that we expect will at least be discussed this offseason. Todd didn't think they'd find the value for him and ultimately bring him back and see what happens at the trade deadline, which is a scenario I do think is plausible. Who else? What are the other chips here? Is I guess Reese Hoskins, if he's back for, I don't know if that contract is going to be super enticing to other teams, but maybe. Um, who else would they be in a position to move at this point?
Isn't being a Brewers fan awesome? You
It's
get your
awesome.
you get your shins kicked in,
Mhm.
you get other things kicked in, and then you get to listen to a couple of slaps on a podcast. Guess which players are gonna be gone next year? Isn't that a
Yeah, you're
fun
right.
existence? But it is the existence, and I think it's fair
Yeah.
to bring it up, and we should bring it up. I think Devin Williams will still be gone. Um,
Mhm.
maybe I don't think one bad outing tanks his value that
Oh,
much.
no, of
I
course
mean,
not. No,
no.
no.
Um, now, ultimately, like, will the return for 1 year? I'm gonna say this: if they trade Devin Williams, prepare to be underwhelmed with the return for 1 year
Right, that's
of
what I
a
was saying.
reliever in the offseason when there's a lot of relievers available. I would curb my enthusiasm a little bit. Yeah, I would curb my enthusiasm a lot a bit. So maybe in that regard, he would be back, but I still get the sense that they will move on from him. I think he's got what, like a $10.5 million option in his contract for this year, and it's not necessarily like hater money for the last year of a reliever's deal, but that's still pretty pricey for a ninth inning pitcher, and they've obviously got a cavalcade of arms that they trust in the back end of the bullpen. So I'm still going to pick Devin Williams. Guess he probably gets moved. Probably came close to getting moved last year too. So there's that. We'll see about like Aaron Savali is an interesting name. He's on the hook for about 8 million. I would venture to guess the Brewers tender him. Don't know that you can get a ton for him, but then again, they packaged Adrian Hauser in a deal last year, moved him to New York. They could carry Aaron Savali, but feels like 8 million for Savali is a little much for a guy that they didn't feel good enough to pitch as a start. Like he was their number 4 starter in the rotation in the playoffs, so not like as not viewed incredibly highly. Highly enough, but not incredibly highly in just the valuation of him. So 8 million's it's not a ton, but this is the Brewers, and 8 million kind of is a ton when you've got a bunch of other options that you could start.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about, the options. There are a lot. I don't know if any of them leads you to a sexy sounding rotation, without adding
Well,
somebody
sure,
that we don't
sure.
know about.
But this is exactly the Brewers' plan and
Mhm.
approach is, yeah, okay, we'll trade Adrian Hauser. Might leave us like supposedly an arm short, but here comes Tobias Myers. Here comes insert name here, Logan Henderson, Chad Patrick. Maybe. I don't think they protect him this offseason,
It's
but
just such a
um,
crowded 40-man roster, like, Chad Patrick was awesome at AAA, but such a crowded 40-man roster between the guys coming off and the guys coming on, and I know we've said 40-man rosters can be manipulated and figured out, but, like, they
but
do
not in
have
the
a lot to
offseason so
do.
much. Not so much
Right.
in the offseason, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they're gonna do. They're gonna have to make some tough calls. There are gonna be some pretty good minor leaguers
Yeah.
who are left off the 40-man roster who need to be added to be protected from the Rule 5 draft. I think they'll probably lose a guy in the Rule 5 draft at this rate. So, it's tough. Brandon Woodruff is such a wild card with that shoulder issue. You never know how a guy's gonna bounce back. We saw Aaron
Yeah,
Ashby
big
take kind of
question.
forever. And if he's
Yeah.
able to be a starter, they'll be in great shape, but what can you realistically expect? And will they have Robert Gasser by the end of the year? He probably wouldn't be a starter. He'd be a reliever. Jacob Mizorowski figures in here somewhere, but as a starter or reliever, I don't know. Like
Logan
they're gonna
Henderson,
have arms. Oh, Logan
maybe
Henderson, of course.
Carlos
Carlos
Rodriguez
Rodriguez.
is ready. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Brewers will figure it out on pitching. The
I agree.
Brewers will always figure it out on pitching. Colin Ray, that option probably gets picked up. Although I would not be shocked if they didn't pick it up.
Or picked it up
He
and
kind
moved
of
him.
sure, yeah. He just faded a lot at the end of the year.
Yeah. What is the biggest thing you're watching this offseason? What is the one question, the one position, the one whatever that you really think is truly fascinating?
Third base.
Yeah, that's what I think
That
too.
I mean, unless you move Sal Frelick there, actually this time, I think you want to do something there. Like you can squint and see Oliver Dunn there. You can squint and
Mm,
see, well, Brock Wilkins like waiting, but his year was sort of a wash. Like if you talk to Brewers people, like it was difficult to evaluate after he got hit in the face. So he's still a ways away, even though he's relatively close. He spent all year at Double A, but he's still a ways away from being a big leaguer. So like it just seems like and then again, they went out and signed Reese Hoskins at a spot of need at first base, and it backfired to a pretty hefty degree. So maybe I'm talking out of my rear end here, but like maybe don't go into this next year with a classic Brewers platoon at third base. Like let's go for something else besides like Oliver Dunn plus Andrew Monasterio. Let's see what's out there. And this is where you advocated for Matt Chapman in the offseason, JR, but that was did not
that one
happen.
hurts.
Maybe
That one
maybe could have
hurts.
happened. It was not going to happen, but it could have happened in a different world.
Yeah, I wonder if he even wanted to come here. I mean, that's the thing is you look at the offseason and the guys that are available and you go back and you say, well, who could the Brewers have signed that would have helped this team? And there's really only 1, 2, maybe 3 names that match up with fit and production where it's like,
yeah,
oh, that would have been a huge upgrade.
it's a tricky
And then those
market
guys
to
have to
play
want
in.
to come to
Yeah,
Milwaukee, right? Like Matt
right.
Chapman might have just had eyes on San Francisco.
It's a tricky game that the Brewers play because they're not often at the top of the market. And
No.
then how many times are like if you go out and get Jamer Candelario this offseason, that's a mistake. That would have been bad.
Yeah.
So
And
like
I would
there's
have
a lot of
advocated
guys.
for it. There's several guys.
I would have said don't get Candelario, don't do that. But like that's how I feel about a lot of that mid tier of free agents. It's like, do you really like the kind of guys that the Pirates often swim in? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that, guys. Um,
Right.
I don't know.
Um, we talk so much about first base, about, oh, they haven't had one since Prince Fielder, which, first of all, is Eric Thames' erasure and Jesus Aguilar erasure. Granted, they haven't sustained their career, but they
One
had
half of
amazing
Jesus
years.
Aguilar. Sure, sure.
One half of Jesus Aguilar. That's correct.
17 to
Third,
18 was good offensive production. Yeah.
when was the last good third baseman this team had? Now, Joey Ortiz, that's unfair. Gold Glove caliber defense, and he had a
No, but I know what you're
stretch. He
saying.
was a really good month.
Yeah.
But like they don't have good third baseman. Just can we just get a corner infielder, please? Who
Oh,
mashes?
Travis Shaw was
Yeah. Yes.
pretty
You're right.
dang good for 2 years.
He had was it 2017 where he was just sensational? I mean, he had 1 year where he
Yeah,
was sensational.
17.
And he was
Yeah.
very good in 18.
I do think I had this thought too. I think Joe Ortiz is the best defensive third baseman this team has had
I
since
think that's right.
back before I can like evaluate that. He's really, really good there, and he should be really, really good at shortstop. And like, don't sleep on what you can get from 2.2 to 2.5 wins just on defense from a shortstop. That's the kind of
Yeah.
value I think he provides. It's like Bryce
Well,
Terang, but at shortstop. So
and he'll get better offensively. Like I believe in his profile more than Bryce Terang's as an offensive player. So if they found a shortstop, on the market to maybe bridge the gap until Brock Wilken is ready. Another year of Joey Ortiz at third base is not going to be the end of the world. In fact, it might be a really good thing. For the first 2 months of the season, Joey Ortiz looked like a revelation, right? So, so I don't want to discount that. I don't want to discount that they have that flexibility. I also wonder if Rhys Hoskins is more of a DH because he can't play the field. Although again, he made a couple nice plays in the playoffs, and it wasn't his fault that the toss to Frankie Montas clanked off his glove. But if that's the case, if he's more of a DH than he is a first baseman, Jake Bauers, I think, is kind of a non-tender candidate. So do they go and try and get another first baseman or one that's going to bat a little better than 199? So that's also something that I am curious to watch. I agree with you. The pitching it's not set, but they're in good shape. They've got arms. It's definitely about who's going to take those spots in the field.
Yeah. I mean, we've already jumped fully into the offseason picture, so let's stay in the middle of the water and
we don't have to
swim in the sharks. Well, really quick, like the Brewers should still be in a good spot for next year. The Cardinals, in theory, like need either an elite offseason or just like maybe they should. I don't want to say tear it down, but they got to do something. Um, the Cubs are the team that's still the closest because they have some financial might. Uh, They have the manager who makes the most money of any manager in baseball. That's got to in baseball history. That's got to be a huge difference maker. Of course, surely they'll win the division with that. But I like the bones of the Cubs organization aren't terrible. They do a pretty decent job of like brewersing to a degree, like Porter Hodge, guys like that. Pete Crow Armstrong's a good player. That should be better next year. Like they've got some money to spend. Who knows? Do they get Corbin Burns? Things like that. Like the Cubs are probably in a decent spot, but feels like the Brewers still like are the kings of this division. And we'll see how the offseason goes for them. But most of these guys are going to be back next year. They'll have a healthy, theoretically, knock on wood, healthy Christian Yelich and all these sorts of different makers. Even without Willie Adames, I think. Well, we'll see how the offseason goes. They never seem to be the favorites, but I think they might be the favorites next year.
Yeah. Sign Alex Bregman is my recommendation, please. Slightly distressed asset.
Ooh.
Slightly distressed
Is he
asset. Still going to get way more money than the
who's
Brewers will
is
pay.
he a is he a Boris guy?
I don't know. I don't pay attention to the agents. Boris is falling out of favor, so I don't know.
That's true.
Maybe he doesn't sign right away, and he's one of those guys, those Boris guys who waits till the very end because he didn't get quite the market he wanted. Maybe that's an opportunity. Here's one more storyline that I think is interesting, and we talked about it during the game. What is this coaching staff going to look like next year? Because the Cubs fired several coaches in the offseason. Craig Counsell is obviously still manager. He's going to be tight with a lot of the guys from this staff. It's certainly easy to logically connect guys on this staff to the Chicago openings, or just in general. I mean, I think actually it's funny. Change of manager, and it's kind of an uncommon level of retention from the coaching staff. Usually there's a lot of turnover, and we didn't see hardly any. They added some guys. Pretty much everybody who was here last year except the manager was here this year with very rare exceptions. So this year it isn't going to be like that. And how will that impact this team? And here's another one. How long is Pat Murphy going to do this? Are we sure that he's going to be the manager for many more years? Like what's his trajectory, would you say?
Well, I'll start with the second part first, I guess. I mean, like, look, the Brewers do have Ricky Weeks there in a position to eventually, in theory, take over as manager. That is sort of if it all falls. I don't want to say optimally, but if all falls according to how it would seem to line up right now, that's in the future for the Brewers. But Pat Murray's got a couple years left on his deal. Like the way that year went, it's the ball is or yeah, the ball is fully in his court and got no signs that he doesn't want to go back out and compete again next year. As for the coaching staff, I would not expect a ton of turnover once again. Um, there's not a whole lot of reason for these coaches who like Murph, who like Milwaukee, who have been here, who like winning, who know the guys on the team. Like, there's not a lot of reason for them to want to go elsewhere unless you're getting some sort of promotion. Now, there are some guys on this coaching staff that have worked themselves into spots where maybe they could get a promotion or a higher job, and that would probably have to come elsewhere because things are pretty good and pretty set on this Milwaukee coaching staff. Like one name that comes to mind is Quentin Berry for sure. Like there's
Mm.
manager potential down the road with Quentin Berry, um, and it's a great thing going on right now in Milwaukee. And I'm not saying he's going to be gone or hypothesizing one way or the other, but like that's a guy that if some better positions open up, he's someone who deserves it, who deserves a look, who deserves to be hired, and you could absolutely see leaving. But as for the most of the coaching staff, I don't expect a whole lot of turnover. Like the Brewers prioritize this sort of continuity, and that's part of what makes them good.
I don't know if people understand how Quentin Berry's role in the running game. I don't know if they understand the scope of it. He's a guy who really worked with these guys on the running game, and that was a huge asset for the Brewers. Second in baseball and stolen bases, just constantly putting pressure on the defense. That's Quentin Berry. He's sensational. He's really good. He's not, I'm sure people realize by this point, first base coaches don't just tell you to go to second or tell you to watch the pickoff move. They obviously have a much greater role, and he's really good. So Walker McKinven is another guy on this staff who I think we've credited in the past with some of the voodoo, some of the alchemy that has helped this Brewers team survive and really get the most out of players that were rejected by other organizations or just weren't seen as studs. Um, I I've decided, Kurt. I think what needs to happen for the Brewers is they just need to be a team that has like, I don't know, 80 wins with 2 weeks to go and gets hot and then stays hot in the playoffs. Because if just anecdotally, it feels like
this, this,
that's what you need. You
this
need to
thing of,
not be that good and then
I
get
mean, like,
good and stay good.
there's discounting the 2020 World Series, which, as we talked about in the previous
We
podcast,
discount.
like I did that, and the player was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, nothing. I didn't say anything."
They can have a
If we're
World Series.
if
It
we're not,
counts. It counts.
yeah,
It's just
sure,
weird.
but taking that away, the Dodgers are not in an entirely dissimilar boat to what the Brewers are in. Now, sure, they've won a couple series in there, but from when would you say, like 2014 through 2013 through this year, it is
Unquestionably one of the best franchises year in, year out,
it
and they
is
have one
it is
ring.
the same thing where they're just ahead, they're ahead, they're ahead, they're ahead, and then they I don't wanna say coast, but, like, they get to the playoffs, and now the Dodgers at least, like, have flaws that you can point to every year where it's like, all of your pitching is hurt, and you are throwing Ryan Brazier in a start in a decisive winner-take-all game. Oh, here's Joe Kelly, he better get 9 outs." Like, the Brewers don't even have that issue, really. So but again, that just goes back to the whole question of, and I think everyone tries to do this, right? You try to figure out like what is holding the Brewers back. And there's not really, I mean, if there is an answer, it's probably this. They don't have a $200 million payroll. That that's probably it. But like that hasn't prevented them from winning 90 to 95 games a year. So why should it prevent them from winning 10 in the playoffs? You know what I mean? Like one of these times. Um, which again, we don't have answers to, and I don't know if fans really have answers to. I think you can kind of like grab onto things and maybe it makes you feel better to have like an answer, but I'm telling you, I'm sitting right here, JR, and I still don't have an answer. It just feels like, the ball's got to bounce your way one time, and it felt like it was bouncing your way this time. And guess what? It bounced a few feet over the right field picnic area fence off the bat of Pete Alonso.
I'll throw another one your way. The New York Yankees won the World Series in 2009 with CC Sabathia. They've been to the playoffs 11 times since and have not been back to the World Series. Now, I in no way think that anyone should have any sympathy for the New York Yankees organization. They have a million titles, more titles than I'm even going to count. So it's not the same. And in fact, it's I kind of don't even like comparing the Brewers to any franchise that do have titles because like the Twins, for example. I mean, is a title in the 1991, is that something that's satisfying this fan base? Is the fan base is pretty starved. A lot of the people who cheer for the Twins have no idea what 1991 looked like, but
Yeah,
there's still a
yeah.
fair amount.
I mean that's yeah, that's one of the the tough things to grapple with, like in Brewers world, right? Is so much of like the current day fandom is people who were born after 1982, well after 1982, which as we've talked about is part of the reason like I just really don't it just doesn't do it for
Right.
me. Um, but like so on one hand, you want to view this run as the most successful run of baseball in Brewers history, which is absolutely true. This is the most successful run of baseball they have ever had. Um, sure, they get a little benefit from the current playoff environment that wasn't the same in 1977, but whatever. Like they're winning 90 games a year. That they have not come close to doing that ever, and they should be commended for that. And this is Pat Murphy sort of that. This was his answer when I asked him after the game, like, how do you put it into words, like the feeling about losing 5 straight times in the playoffs right away? And he said they should be commended for making the playoffs every year in that time. And while I agree with that, like
Mm.
absolutely, they should be commended for this. A bunch of other organizations, I don't want to say would die for this, but they sure want it. They sure want to have a chance every postseason. It's
Yeah.
gotten to the point where like this is what a generation of Brewers fans I think have come to expect. I mean, it's honestly not that different than the expectation to win for like the Yankees. It really is not. If you care about the Brewers, if you follow the Brewers, your expectations are to win the division. And when that comes around, your expectations don't change in October just because you can't win in years past. You expect one of these years to do something, and they can't. They have not been able to. So it just creates this weird dichotomy of like, yeah, absolutely commendable for being one of the best run organizations year in year out that wins 90 plus games, and that should not be washed over. Like that's really hard to do when you give your fans 6 months of fun and good times on a nightly basis in the summer. But how do you how do you marry the two? I don't know. I don't know because people want
There's
more and
also
they should.
they should. Yeah, I think it's completely understandable that people would look at 2024 and say that was a waste of time. I don't think that's necessarily correct. In fact, I think we could look back and find that the building blocks were in place to for a late season October run here in the next couple years. But I also know this: the Brewers, the most wins they've ever had in franchise history is 96. That, of course, happened most recently in 2018. Um, 96 wins, the best ever showing by the Milwaukee Brewers, would never be the best record in any postseason since. I mean, I only went back looked through the since the introduction of the wild card, but I'm sure it's pretty significant throughout the course of history. The fewer teams making it before that. There was one time, I think in 2014, it would have been just one team ranked ahead of them, but in every other year, maybe 2016 too, in every other year, there's multiple teams ranked ahead of you. 6 teams would have been ranked ahead of you in 2019. Again, that's what the best win total the Brewers have ever had. They've never been a behemoth. They have always been a team that has been good enough to scrape in, but not a team that you should realistically expect to get to the World Series. And I'm not calling that making it sound like a success. I'm saying like they've had bites of the apple. At some point, they have to get the whole apple. Like at some point, they have to really build a team that's going to compete for a World Series and not a team that's just going to scrape in, be good enough, and maybe get hot. It doesn't mean that they're going to actually win a World Series if they do that, but it sure would be nice to just see it, see it with your own eyes, because every other franchise in baseball has had a year greater than 96 wins, except for the Marlins and the Rockies. And they have 25 years less history than the Milwaukee Brewers do. They're the only two teams out there that have their best season is less than 96 wins. So at some point, the Brewers need to invest
Yeah, but
in having a real team, right?
sure. Like devil's advocate here, you win 98 games. Great, you're in this exact same position. Well, maybe you get the
Well, that's
bye,
true.
but
Of course.
you're in the
Yep,
exact
of
same
course.
position you are now, and you need to perform when the lights are on. And I don't
Yeah.
know what the magic recipe is for that. Like the Dodgers have all the guys, and they quite frankly never perform when the lights are on. Now maybe this year will be different, and um, they're they're doing the bites of the apple thing too. And like this is the thing about it. Like the bites of the apple is absolutely
It's
sound
correct.
theory,
Yes, it's correct.
and it is just going to be a dagger to the Milwaukee Brewers if the architect of the bites of the apple theory takes one bite in a different apple, perhaps a big apple,
Big apple.
and hoist a trophy at the end of it. That would be
I
a
can't.
particular like the Mets had won today. I think the vibe of me saying that on this podcast would feel a lot different than if it was 1-1 going back to New York like it is. But
Shouts to Nick Castellano.
which like this all ultimately gets me back to this. The existence that the Milwaukee Brewers live in would be yearned for, is desired by dozens of other teams in baseball in the current day. But that doesn't make this any easier for the Brewers or their fans now. And what the existence that they live feels like, it's cruel.
Yes, it does. It does. I mean, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the
Like, what am
Bucks
I
won a
supposed to
title
do?
when they were the
What am I supposed to do? Sit here and say, "Oh, you guys are sad? You won 93 games again. You had 6 months of fun." Like, that's absolutely true. It was a great year for the Brewers. But
it was. Anyway,
that doesn't take away the lifeless energy in the ballpark, in the concourses as we were walking to the elevator to go down to the press conference, just like feeling the despair from the silence.
the Bucks won a title when they were the 3 seed. Many times they've been the first overall seed, best record in the NBA, and it hasn't worked out. The Packers won a Super Bowl when they were the bottom seed in the NFC. They came back the next year as the unquestioned number 1 seed and didn't make it out. Curt, it's going to have to be an 87 win Brewers team that gets hot at the end of the year, because I don't think there's any other formula other than
They've tried it all.
They've tried everything else. That's it. They've tried everything else.
You could do the super team thing for a year. That'd be kind of fun.
Like the Padres.
Like the
Oh,
Padres.
no. Yeah. Well, it worked out for the Padres. I mean, yes, they overspent. It collapsed on them, and then they got amazing pieces for Juan Soto and wound up right back in the same spot. And quite honestly, look amazing. They look like a team that could win the World Series so easily.
Yeah,
The Milwaukee Brewers
AJ Preller's good at this. Handsome guy. He's good at this.
He is. He is. Curt, I have nothing else to say. What do you want to say?
I think we got it. I think we left it all out on the field.
We did. We left it all on the field. We're gonna have to come back.
I've got some brisket to go eat.
Leftover brisket, so good. Yum, 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 yum. We are gonna come back. We're gonna talk about this offseason. We could talk about our predictions. We can go back to our preseason predictions. That's still something that has to happen. We could talk about the farm system, some of the guys that we think are gonna make an impact next year. There's a couple names that I can think of that we've said a few times that will probably be discussed. We can also obviously have pods as news happens, as moves are made. Maybe we can do something here during the World Series as a next possible entryway into the Microbrew podcast universe. But for now, Curt, I think we're going to leave the people. We're going to leave them and let them marinate in some offseason / postseason baseball that is not the Brewers, and see what happens from there. Sound good to you?
I think it does. I think that sounds great.
Fantastic. Curt, thank you for joining me. Thank you, listeners, for joining us as well on this episode of the Microbrew podcast. My name is JR Radcliffe. He's Curt Hogg. We'll be back in touch with you very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.